We've got a few missing parties, so I'd like to welcome everybody here. And before we do have our official welcome, Mike, I just want to June Graham. Where is she? There we are.
Oh, June, how are you?
June, it's really nice to have you back. So, can you hear us? I'm embarrassing you slightly. It's very nice to have you back. Okay, Mike, can you open our meeting?
I hoka hauri mātou ki a koe tēnei ai. Pana ki te a mātou e hui ki te kōrero ngā mea e pāna ki a ka hangunu whānui. I tēnei wā ki rongi te mohi o tana o te rereke o ngā whakaro ki te titi. Ngari ko te tiwana ko te ngāka ka taitara ki maari ki o mātou kōrero. I tēnei wā no rere pā koe nei mea. Thank
you, Mike. We haven't got two councillors, just one. There are no apologies. There are no apologies. Notices, just one notice I've got, that late item, we are not going to... Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was going to raise that, but you go ahead.
We were not going to discuss that today.
And Mr. Chairman, I believe if it goes to a committee, that it should be in committee, because there's a name associated with that. So it should be discussed in committee, at a committee meeting, in my view, for legitimate reasons.
I think that's a good idea. We'll take that on board. Are there any other notices?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I have to drive to Gisborne after this, so in terms of health and safety, if I could leave it 3:30. I haven't got any lights on my truck.
His age is showing. Okay, so an advance apology from Mr. Mohi, who will be leaving at 3 o'clock. We should be chomping along by then anyway. So we don't have to move and second apologies, there were none. Conflict of interest declarations, just want to remind everybody, have we all got our conflict of interest, our new ones in for the auditor? Are there anyone outstanding there? Councillor Barker. So if you could just make that happen in the next couple of days, that would be, or today, that would be excellent. Are there any new conflicts? No new conflicts. What's that? Well, you can, I'm sure. I'm sure we could find some. So, confirmation of the previous minutes, January the 31st. For accuracy, I see my grand speech is in there. Fenton might not like that, might not. Councillor Bell.
On page 4, the second bullet from the top reads, as it's written now, suggests that the review of the consent be notified, which would imply that it's referring to the consent mentioned immediately before, which is actually a statement saying that there is no consent of discharge of sewage in the estuary. So it's really a reference back to the outfall consent that's mentioned at the top of this section. And so all I'm suggesting is that we change that bullet to say review of the outfall consent be notified.
You happy with that, James?
Okay.
Certainly as a record of the discussion, yes, it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Tom will have to.
So you just want to insert the word outfall before the word consent in that second bullet? Suggested that review of the outfall consent be notified.
Can we have someone move the minutes are correct? Tom? Neil, you second it? Any discussion? All those in favour? Against? The minutes are accepted. Thank you very much. Confirmed. Follow up from the previous council meetings.
Chair, the Two of the items have been provided, the answers to those have been provided to councillors by way of email, and the record of those within the papers. The further item in relation to fish death at Lake Tutera will be reported to the Environment Services Committee at the next opportunity.
Any questions? Item 4. Can we have a mover to accept the... Oh, okay. Don't worry, we've got plenty of time, Tom. You can just relax.
The item 3 regarding the regional policy statement in Craggy Range, I think it's attached here. This attachment from Gavin Ide basically seems to be saying that in 1998, a previous council decided we're not getting into this space. Is that a correct reading of what this issue fails to meet the criteria of a regionally significant issue, is what that says? And I guess my further query about this is that actually a position that this council would take today? And as we are somewhere in our schedule, are we going through the regional, the R, whatever this is in, the RRMP, or is it the...
Look, I'm happy to speak to this, but I might also ask Mrs. Lambert, given that she was responsible for this version of the RRMP. Look, my understanding is that landscape protection is a policy matter of regional significance and therefore is covered in the RPS. However, particular outstanding natural landscapes are kind of geographically specific and therefore fall to the next tier of the planning hierarchy, which is at the district plan level where they are protected. So there wasn't any landscape, I think, that was deemed at that point to be regionally significant, if I've got that correct. But
so if I could just perhaps explain the context of what regionally significant criteria meant. At the time, and still today, the Resource Management Act requires a regional policy statement to identify the regionally significant issues for the region. And this council set 4 criteria that had to be met for an issue to be regionally significant. Otherwise, it would be very much a just the same, look, it's exactly the same as any other regional policy statement in any other part of the country. Right. And in terms of those criteria, the issue of the protection of outstanding natural landscapes did not pass, if you like, or make it to that status. However, it's always been a matter that the council has to manage in terms of the Resource Management Act. So it has been addressed in the regional policy statement, but not as one of those Hawke's Bay regionally significant criteria. And at the time, there was a lot of discussion with the territorial authorities about this, because we were all grappling with what does the RMA mean and who should be doing what. And the district councils and city council were quite clear that it was their responsibility to identify those significant landscapes and outstanding landscapes in their district plans. And at that time, this is in 1998, is that correct? Is that when this is happening? Around about then, I think it was notified in 1999, yes. Yeah.
So given all that, this council therefore would never express an opinion as to whether, let's say, Tomato Peak was an outstanding landscape or not, or was deserving of special protection or not.
Well, the regional policy statement doesn't contain any rules. So what we would have done, and I would have to go back and look back through our records, is we were certainly involved as part of a broader project to identify significant landscapes. And we would have submitted to the relevant TA if they perhaps omitted to include a particular landscape, but I'm pretty sure Hastings included Tomato Peak.
It's in the district plan, yes. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Could I just add to that I think that's the primary responsibility of the territorial authority rather than the regional council.
Okay, we have someone move to accept the follow-ups.
I actually wanted to
You got a point?
raise one other point.
Yes, sure.
It was in relation-
Then you'll move.
Then I'll move. It was in relation to the first one, which was the Regional Pest Management Plan adoption. And there was I don't know if other councillors can recall, there was a cost-benefit analysis done there based on an 8% present net value, I think, or 8% discounted rate. And it turns out it was just put in there as a, for instance, it wasn't actually a justification at all. So the paper was very unclear, and it's left me a little uneasy about not the allocation of funds for this, but what our priorities are and how we work them out and how we decide how much we spend on the various pests that we're dealing with here. So I'm just signalling that I would like us to have a much closer look at that when we do our next annual plan round. It's a bit late for this now. It's already been passed and put out for public consultation. So with those words, Chair, I'm happy to move.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr Chair, I wonder, before we move, I had assumed there was an additional item in regard to the Napier City Council district plan change in regard to Park Island, and some action follow-up point from there. Are we able to confirm that, or can I raise it as a later item?
Perhaps you should raise it as a later item. I mean, definitely, it was discussed. It's been in red, a follow-up for RPC. So maybe it is an RPC issue. But raise it anyway. I'd like to talk about it anyway. Okay, do we have will you second? You move. Neil, will you second? All those in favour? Just accept the follow-up. Thank you. Call for items not on the agenda. Rick, can you report on the Gisborne?
I think mayors and chairs, and the third item I've got is cadetships.
Cadetships. So, you're at Gisborne?
Mayors and chairs.
Mayors and chairs, eh?
Mayors and chairs and cadetships.
I have two, Upper Narrora and Rangatani Settlement Group visit. Any other minor item? You're going to review one?
Mr Chair, the Ahuriri Estuary contamination, and the second one is the Napier City Council changed the district plan in regard to Park Island.
Are there any other minor items? If not, we'll move on. Thank you very much.
I do want to raise something else, and I'm sorry I didn't realise it was part of the previous agenda item. The Lagoima request for that vessel or vessels that got inside the protected area when the rocket launch was supposed to happen. I see the requests being completed. I'd like to see the answers as well. Is that possible?
Yeah, that'll be a good one. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move to item 6, which is the big issue of the day, adoption of navigational safety bylaws. And who's taking us through this, Wayne or Liz?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Well, I actually asked the Harbour Master to come forward. I know you won't
Harbour
recognise him in a suit and tie, but here he is.
Looking very esteemed.
This is the same paper you came and spoke to us before the committee, is that right?
Yes,
And it was a draft for consultation.
yes.
And did the draft of consultation go to a council committee? No council committee, once the consultation process was completed, did the draft as completed and to be recommended to council go to council committee?
When was the last time you appeared, was that Environment and Services or Corporate and Strategic?
The last time I appeared was in front of this forum.
Council? Corporate and Strategic. It has been to a committee.
It was the draft for consultation, the question I'm getting here,
Yeah, I
I mean, consultation, the consultation is complete and you're now reporting on the consultation. So our question is, did the paper as completed after consultation go to a council committee?
I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect, given the nature of this paper, the answer is no.
It's my suspicion. Is this why the process is moving agree or not?
No, it does not.
Let's do it anyway. I agree. We all agree?
We just want to make sure the process we've got, otherwise it'll just unravel, we'll be back to where we were.
Okay. Accepting that, is there any points you wish to make that are additional?
Since the previous time I sat in front of this group, it was agreed at that time that there were some issues, some problems with residents around the Porongahau River and the recreational use. And it was agreed we would re-engage with those people, which I subsequently did. The bylaw as it stands was deemed to be perfectly suitable, but the signage that was on the river was misleading, particularly to people who only visit there for holidays and things. So we agreed on a new sign, how the sign would look, and that sign has been made and installed at the riverbank, and is consistent with the small sign that's in the draft bylaw presented with this document. Everything else is as per it was before Christmas when I sat here.
Thank you. Before I go, General, I have one question. This is labelled navigation safety bylaws. I'm not sure that means safety laws just to do with navigation, but it clearly isn't, because you're talking about oil discharge. So I was searching through, and I might have missed it, because the issue on my mind is, what do we do about people who come into the port and empty their slosh bucket into in a harbour? But I know it's difficult to catch them. If I can just carry on, I know it's difficult to catch them. But if we did, it's not written here that they're not allowed to do that. Well, unless you include, so you get close to it, I guess. But
It's not done in the bylaw. However, we have at our disposal the Resource Management Marine Pollution Regulations, which quite clearly lay out what can be done, what's allowed to be discharged and what not, within coastal regions, whether the sewerage is raw sewerage or treated, whether what people are attempting to do forms part of the day-to-day activities that happen on board ships and fishing boats. Some are allowed for and some are strictly prohibited and controlled.
So I think the distinction, Chair, is that under the maritime regulations there are a range of hazards that vessels themselves create, whether it be oil or carrying hazardous substances or explosives, if you like. So these regulations relate to the effect of the vessel itself on the marine environment and on people. The other regulations sit under the Resource Management Act, and they will relate to what somebody who might happen to be on a vessel might then tip into the environment, such as their sewage. So that is not something that's administered by the Harbour Master. That is something which is administered by our compliance team under the Resource Management Regulations.
okay.
Yep. And in relation to the Ahuriri estuary issues, we can perhaps give a further update in the minor item later on in terms of what we're doing on that question at present.
Okay. Paul?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Martin. Probably unrelated to the bylaws that you're proposing, but it's around the item that came up in the IO request around the Rocket Lab exclusion zone, which is obviously just a new thing, and you had a couple of people that didn't quite behave by the rules last time round. Are you confident that there is sufficient education in the boating community that they realise that, because with more launches being proposed, are you confident that there's sufficient knowledge amongst the boating community that there is an exclusion zone and what that actually means?
Yes, I am. the recreational boat, which was the commercial boat that was involved. We've investigated along with him and managed to plug a loophole that he fell foul of. At the end of the day, what happened around the exclusion zone was well notified in notices to mariners, which as a professional seafarer he should have made himself aware of. But that said, we want to work with them to make sure they know about it. We don't want to be infringing or chasing people. What is happening now, and the second boat that got in there was particularly badly behaved because he'd been made aware, is that Rocket Lab now have staff at each boat ramp adjacent to the peninsula, and they engage with people as they're launching their boats and explain the situation, and it's gone very well. On the day that those two boats fell foul of the exclusion zone, there were 80-something boats out on the water who all behaved themselves, and the day after got quite a spectacular show.
I'll just say a very good report. Thank you very much. Followed a good process, and I prefer to have gone to a committee rather than straight to here. But I'll say that someone who manages this process for you should have ensured that you didn't fall into this hole. This is no fault on your own, but good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just take it as read. And just to say that that meeting was held at the Tai Whenua in Hastings, here at Tona. It was the first of two meetings that are going outside of the chambers for this year to involve the community. It was a good meeting in terms of a lot of the locals came in during the 2 or 3 hour meeting, including the chairman of the Niki, Ngahiwi Tamona. One of the, and also was an opportunity to meet the new delegate from Wairoa, Michelle McElroy, who came with guns loaded, as it were. Especially concerning the article from the subject, rather, from Campbell Leakey with the regional pest management plan. She seemed to have a fairly fixed idea that the council were dropping 1080 as part of their plan, and even though she was told that 1080 is used very seldom by the council, because most of the lands that they treat are actually on the edge of farms, and it's land baited, which alerted me also to the fact that in Maoridom the use of 1080 is very misunderstood. Having been part of DOC's program over the last 20 years, I'm well aware of the pros and the cons of 1080, but the anti part, and this lady from Wairoa was probably part of it, I think is sometimes driven by the pig hunters who would rather have a lot of pigs and not their dogs killed. Also discussed was the ongoing complaint from Maungaharuru, Tangitu, as their demand as a marae, or as a legal entity, to have somebody on the Maori committee. This was somewhat euchred, as it were, as they have a person on the Whanganui Roto Tai Whenua, that's Napier, anyway, as a proxy. and that particular tai whenua has been probably the only one that regularly doesn't have the full quota of 3 people attending. So they were short again that day by 1, so the proxy attended, and he's an outstanding young gentleman, Hori Reti. And the verbal update by the CEO was well received. It's an opportunity for Maori representatives to hear the good news and the bad news straight from the horse's mouth. So in terms of PR, it's an excellent opportunity to question things. Also attending and welcoming was what we call a tauira, or a young student just left high school, who's been employed partly by the Hawke's Bay Tourism Board and funded by Te Puni Kōkiri, the Tourism Board, and a number of other agencies to start a career in tourism. I think that was all. Fenton, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it was a pretty good summation of the day. I'm happy to move if that's helpful, Chair. Nothing further to add, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to mention to Mr Mohi that Māoridom is not the only part of the community which has issues with 1080, and some of the comments made were very reflective of ones that the challenges that I have to deal with in those communities as well.
June won't be able to hear me. Okay, we will move to fixing the common seal, item 8.
Thank you, Chair. So this reflects some new staff coming on board and delegations associated with that, but also a very low level of leasehold land for this period. Probably reflects the Christmas holiday period, although it's possible that we are getting to a point of those properties that are going to be leaseholded largely, having been leaseholded through the recent period where we've had a high volume in that space. But look, we'll wait and see.
Happy to move, Chair, but on perhaps a proviso that we do get more clarity around that at the next meeting or one subsequent meeting. But I'm happy to move, Chair.
Do you have a second? Second to Paul. Do you wish to speak? Paul, do you wish to speak? Anyone else wish to speak? All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? We move to item 9. Start with Napier Council here. The annual plan progress report. Is Menton going to take us through?
Coming, he'd gone back to his desk to do
Well,
some work.
Are you on then, Jessica?
I can be, he's not here.
So, Chair, we've obviously got both the financials and the activity reporting. Here's Menton now. So perhaps if we start with the financials. There's a couple of variances which have been noted. Look, I'd just make the observation around the water conservation order application. Obviously, this was an unbudgeted item, and as such, we are absorbing significant costs in relation to this. We do have legal representation, as you would expect, and some supplementary expert advice. So there's a fair bit of cost which we have been incurring, and we are absorbing that within existing budgets, but it is having a displacement effect on other priorities, particularly for the planning team. And I guess we should highlight the fact that there will be a lot of activity around the water conservation order until the year end, particularly as the tribunal is expecting a report from the council in relation to tank before the end of the financial year, and it could be the driver of a year-end deficit in this area. But we'll keep you posted. Manton, you have some other things you want to perhaps draw to attention? I don't know.
Yeah, so just a brief paper where we're at currently through the year. We have had considerable view in our LTP at the moment, so this isn't probably as detailed as we would have liked, but if there's any questions coming out of it, we are on top of where we're at, so we can answer those as we go. Just letting you know that we will be doing our reforecast in March, coming to you in April, so that will give an absolute idea of where we're heading for the year, and we can factor in a few of these other things like the WCO and our own internal reorganisation and things like that at that stage. So I'm happy to take questions.
Chair, can you just confirm, two questions, confirm that the variance 9.4% is more about state and time rather than any other alarming activity or lack of activity?
Sorry, that is in which page?
Sorry, the graph on page 20.
Oh, right. We're heading there. Cool, and so we're talking about the variance. So yeah, that will, so if they've highlighted it, that yellow colour, it is a variance in timing, and they still project that by the end of the year they'll be where they said they'd be. It's the red that will have indicated that they are off track and may be at the end of the year as well. And those were those two that we've highlighted there, and you'll see through the full report in the attachment.
Okay, so just in regard to the hail and performance target, is that an issue at our end, or is it an issue with an interaction with the TLAs?
I can answer that if you like. Essentially, it's an issue at our end, but it's a technical / computer or IT issue. The intent is that there is the ability for all the TAs to be able to access a master database, which we own or we maintain. At the moment, we just have it as a spreadsheet. We want to be able to make it much more interactive for them. We'll be putting it on our website and continuing to update it. So it's largely a technical issue, the reason that has not been met.
Question, Chair. So when you look at that, the table, I get on page 22, table 14, progress report to date, with the first one there being off-track sites that is required and landowners advised of site status. Current records not being checked. What is current records not being checked? It kind of seems to be a bit of a hole somewhere to me.
So what we have is we've got a spreadsheet that identifies all of the known hail sites across the region, and they're listed as per property. When we get inquiries either from members of the public or from other councils about those specific properties, and we get them regularly, particularly from the other councils, we provide that information. What hasn't happened at any point is a comprehensive audit of all that information going out and checking its accuracy and whether it's still up to date. We do add it as information comes to hand. I would note though that in almost all cases where you have a contaminated site, it's unlikely to have remediated itself and no longer be a contaminated site. So from our perspective, it's relatively low risk. Those that are known are on the register and are there. What we don't have is essentially any dedicated resource to continue to go out and make sure it's as up to date in a very proactive way as you might wish.
So so from my understanding of that, James, is that so if a site's on the list, you're not actually actively going out and checking to see that they should still be on the list. You're making the assumption that they will be on there because it's not going to remediate yourself.
That is correct. Yep. And indeed, if we get information to say that something has been remediated, then we will remove it from it. There will be an incentive on a landowner to do that if, for example, they're doing that to prepare some land for sale, and they are having it remediated. They will want to ensure that it's no longer on the hail site. So there's an inbuilt incentive, if you like, for landowners to let us know. And I guess there's a question about whether it would be worth our investment putting staff time into going out and checking every one of these. It's probably going to be appropriate at some point in time to just go out and check that all the information is accurate and up to date. It's not on the current work program, but I have had a discussion with Liz and Wayne about if and when we get additional resourcing for the compliance team as part of a long-term plan, whether this might be something that we turn our mind to.
Any more questions, or do we accept the progress report? Do we have a mover?
Well, certainly the variance reporting we were discussing a moment ago was in relation to the activity reports as well, and more than happy to take any questions on the activity reports, unless you want to just move both the finances and the activity report.
No, just another one.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I only had three, and I've answered two of them been answered already. Page 100, which is in the attachment 2, the variance in terms of, this is monitor consents. 89% of monitor consents have achieved a full compliance, which is down from on the 95% target, such as life. And it goes on a bit there to talk about they've been either fixed or rectified within 6 months of enforcement action and so on. I'm curious to know what that actually means by way of numbers. Is that 5, 50, 500? Just for I suppose for in future, or whether that's a challenge to pull that information out.
Councillor, I'll just have to quantify that with Mr. Wright and perhaps just drop you an email or something just to explain that. Yep.
We had a mover, didn't we? Fenton, and a seconder? Your second? Okay, well, we're moving a second. Do you wish to speak, Fenton?
No.
Paul? Anyone else wish to speak on the subject? A mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. It's moved. Item 10, which is the Regional Planning Committee. I'll report on that, since I think I chaired it. We had a representation from Central Hawke's Bay on Plan Change 6. I thought it didn't go that well. I thought he was very poorly briefed and was led into the lion's den, effectively. And I thought that the mana whenua of Central Hawke's Bay were very poorly organised, and I thought Central Hawke's Bay in total were poorly organised. And the young fellow who presented didn't even know what the committee was about, so it was not a great experience for him, and from my perspective, an opportunity lost. But nevertheless, the issue was debated for the second time, and it was unanimously accepted by the RPC that Plan Change 6 would go as written, but that we would do everything possible to help the people of Central Hawke's Bay get through that. Whether that's what they would desired, probably not. We also had an update on oil and gas, and looked at the work program around that, and outstanding water bodies, and we're still dealing with both those issues. Outstanding water bodies is a really interesting one. I personally don't want to spend too much time talking about outstanding water bodies. I'd rather, and I've conveyed this to them, I'd rather spend more energy and time talking about the ones that aren't so outstanding and what are we going to do to fix them. So, but that wasn't discussed. That's just a little bit of personal view. Are there any other questions related to?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. 2.1.2 notes and supports the approach to find solutions. So now the chief executive was to fund some work from the appropriate budget. Can you tell us what's happened?
So we received a proposal from the Surface Water Users Group, and that had relatively extensive scope. The scope was peer reviewed by staff, and we made some suggestions about how to reduce the cost of the exercise by not duplicating work that had previously been done by council. That was provided back to the group and then back to their preferred consultant. Unfortunately, that only reduced the overall cost of the exercise by about $2,000. So we were left with a project total cost of $65,000. This is not a budgeted item and we don't have any dedicated budget for this, but we scraped around and we've managed to find $50,000, and I have offered to the Surface Water Group $50,000 funding of council funding for the $65,000, and have requested the remaining $15,000 be found either from within the consent holder group themselves or from a party like Irrigation New Zealand, or potentially from the Ministry for Primary Industries. We're just concluding those discussions at the moment. It's fair to say that there was a bit of disappointment on the other side that we wouldn't fund this entirely. But look, I just reiterate that this is not a budgeted item. We've got many pressures on the budgets at the moment, and it doesn't seem unreasonable for me, if these are multi-million-dollar enterprises that have hundreds of thousands of dollars at risk from the minimum flows, that they can find $15,000 between themselves. So they're busily doing that at present.
So that's progressing for someone to be engaged and get on with some work pretty soon?
That's correct. That's Aqualink, and they will start as soon as we've resolved these funding issues, which I expect to be within days, if not next week or so.
Have we got any contingency fund left?
No. So this is
sort of went in July of last year, did it?
Okay, Peter, I'll come back to you, but Mr. Moore, he wants an opportunity to give me a bash around the head. So here he goes.
Yes, okay. I would agree with the chairman regarding the Central Hawke's Bay Water Users Group, very poorly organised. However, in terms of the Tamatea representative on He Tōtaki Tini, she was only notified that day that she would be replacing the person that stood down. He Tōtaki Tini is the biggest of the treaty groups in terms of population. And so the new member representing Tamatea from now on for the Regional Planning Committee will be Jenny Smith, who sent out a very strongly worded email to the Maori committee members, the Regional Planning Committee members, complaining that they were actually trampling on the mana of Tamatea tangata whenua, and asked them to be thinking about it again. What else am I going to say here? Well, that's about it. So if the committee indeed moves this, it's just sort of at a stage where Tamatea Maori are very upset about what happened on the day. And just in terms of that, speaking with some of the other legal entities that are a part of this committee, they're actually very unhappy that this committee is moving as it is, and there has been threats that they're going to pull out of the committee because they just don't think it's working very well. Thank you.
Sorry, pull out of the RPC or the Maori Committee?
Sorry, the Regional Planning Committee.
And the mana, whose mana had been trampled on?
Tamatea, which is Central Hawke's Bay.
As Tai Whenua.
As the mana whenua, which is the people, the Maori people there that come from that land.
Your mic, I got off quite lightly there. Peter.
I just wanted to make the observation, that the RPC's now sent two pretty clear signals regarding its view on the implementation of Plan Change 6, and I think the message maybe is sheeting home, because if any of you looked at the consents that we were sent this week, the applications for resource consents, there are several applications there for dams in Central Hawke's Bay. So people are starting to think about their future and how they might be able to manage, what Plan Change 6 requires of them.
Any other questions? Debbie?
Thank you. I asked, with regard to the oil and gas plan change work program, I asked the staff how it was being communicated. Apparently there's some opportunity for stakeholder engagement through the website, which hasn't been communicated to anybody, and the answer I received was, well, that was over to the comms staff. So do we have to wait 6 weeks to get an answer to that, or is that opportunity being more widely circulated? Because at the time it was very difficult to even find it on the website.
Yeah, look, we'll follow that up. this has been obviously a source of ongoing irritation for councillors. And part of, I think, the challenge with this is this was the pre-consultation phase that was supposed to be highly targeted before a wider full consultation with the general public, and we're sort of caught in the space of a lot of people wanting to have engagement at this early on. The next meeting of the Regional Planning Committee, we will be having a presentation from PEPANS and also from another interested party in the community about the oil and gas plan change. And I guess just while I'm talking about the next RPC meeting, I hate to disappoint the Chair in relation to outstanding freshwater bodies, but we do have a workshop scheduled on that. We do need some guidance on this, and I guess I reflect on the earlier item around resourcing and the fact that we will miss the target date for getting this oil and gas plan. Getting the outstanding freshwater body plan change up, which is a function of this whole exercise being made significantly more complex than how we had originally proposed to do it, which was to keep it pretty simple, pretty light touch, get the job done. But of course, the Regional Planning Committee, and particularly the Tangata Whenua reps, wanted to do this as a very, very deep dive, and it's become extremely resource hungry and is taking us twice as long. But that's the consequence of wanting to do this exercise, and hence you will have a workshop in some depth on this next week.
Nonsense. Okay, no more questions. Do we have someone to move that we accept the report from the RPC?
I'll move.
Move. Seconder. You wish to speak? No. All those in favour? Aye. It's carried. Item 11, a report from the Environment and Services Committee. Tom? Pause, team.
All right, we had a pretty extensive discussion of a new document, enforcement policy review. There were quite a few suggestions made from the floor, as I recall, as to ways that could be given a bit more context, and one of those was to be more explicit in speaking to the sort of political regulatory interface, if you will. So that is, as noted here, is coming back to the next Environment Committee meeting. Biodiversity strategy, you recall that presentation laid out a methodology for targeting, pretty sophisticated targeting methodology for choosing the areas to put our priorities into. And I think everybody was basically pleased with that approach. Science monitoring, we were happily told that Steve Schwabe didn't need any more money, and he was adequately provided for at present, and so there's nothing, no issues flagged there. Marine and Coastal Group update. The discussion there had to do with, as I recall, there's a sort of an identified need in the neighborhood of $5 million of research that really has to be done to understand what the environmental condition of the bay is and what can be done about that. And we are looking from our direction to investing in the neighborhood of, I think, $500,000-600,000 in that pot, but that is dependent on other people coming to the party as well. And so that's where that sits. But it does seem to be a process that is presently including all the relevant stakeholders, and everybody seems to be pretty copacetic about it. We had those presentations on our various hotspots, and which included some of our councillors commenting as well from their ambassadorial perspectives. And I think the message there was that a lot of progress is being made within the agreed upon strategies in those areas. And what the staff reported was pretty much from a technical direction. We're doing this, the next thing, and we are progressing along merrily. And but what was pointed out was that there's also a broader political context, and there are other things going on around each of those projects as well. And in some cases more than others, there are councillors involved in trying to give some shape to all of that and keep an eye on it. And it's our chairman's expectation that kind of oversight is happening on an ongoing basis in each of those areas. So, but I think, again, there wasn't anything reported that raised any flags that I can recall. Similarly, with the public transport, I think there the two things I can recall is that the hospital, the whatever you call it, but there's been quite an uptake in usage of the bus service by hospital employees. That's been it was presented to us as a pretty successful aspect of this. Broader context is that rider, it's down, overall usage is down, I think it was 2% year over year. And there were some congestion issues that are being addressed on one or two of the lines. So that was the nature of that presentation. Tomato Park Trust. We had two representatives of the trust board and a third in the audience, and they laid out their refreshed vision for what's going on up on the peak. And I'd have to say evaded a certain part of the questioning that had to do with what actually is going on at the moment with respect to that track, and events have sort of borne out since then the skepticism that some of us expressed about that. But be that as it may, they also tabled in their presentation a potential land purchase, which would be I gather, a first in a long time addition to the property held by the trust. And I believe their takeaway from the meeting here was that, okay, if that's something on your agenda, it's up to you to come back at some point with a proposition that the council will entertain. So that was the extent of that. And I don't see anything else here to comment on. That's my report.
Any questions for Tom? Do we have a move to accept this
I'll
report?
move the report.
Tom's moved, it's been seconded. Tom, oh, you don't want to speak anymore? Neil?
Yes, just very briefly, Mr. Chair, I just want to make the point around the biodiversity strategy ecosystem prioritisation tool, which I thought was an excellent presentation. But I'm interested to know and see whether, in fact, we can adopt that tool to guide right across the organisation. For example, when making decisions around our asset management or our compliance or consenting, the integrated catchment plans, afforestation, all of those aspects of council delivery could be influenced by application of that tool and determining what the priority ecosystems are and what impacts that the activities by our respective elements of the organisation could have on those prioritised areas. So I'm hoping that we do truly embed both biodiversity and ecosystem prioritisation as a part of general council operations.
Thank you, Neil. Any other comment?
Yes, from the Environmental Services Committee, we had what I thought was an outstanding report from the staff on the 6 hotspots. And I would have thought if any of us had have written down at the beginning of this process what we thought the outcomes were, then no matter how optimistic our predictions were, they would have been greatly exceeded by the report we got the other day. It was simply an outstanding report. I wish we could have had a way in which we could present that as part of our round to the public about what we're hoping to do for improving the environment and justifying our projected increase in rate. Because if the public saw half of that, I'm sure they would throw more money at us, given the results they got. The success was due to two things. Firstly, the innovation and the vigour and the aptitude of our staff who went about this. But I thought, more importantly, it was because of the reception we got from the general public. And I was thinking about the report about the farmers who decided rather than plant exotics for money, decided they wanted to plant natives. And the report we got on the work they've done up the back of the Haruri estuary about this on. And a lot of people go out of their way to do good things. And I think one of the features we have been remiss in is saying thank you. I think a lot of people do things and we should acknowledge them, an acknowledgement or a thank you. So I would like the Regional Council to develop a certificate of appreciation, either a thank you or an appreciation, a formal certificate to be signed, by the Chief Executive and the Chair, and for us to have a thing from time to time, invite the people in here or to something else, a little ceremony, to say to people, thank you for the efforts they've made on behalf of the environment and helping to achieve the aims that we wish to. The citation. I think it would be really good, and in a form that's in a frame that they can hang on the wall somewhere and present it to them as an appreciation. So I'd wonder, just put that on the deck, and I wonder if they can be put down for matters arising with some other time. But I think we do fail to say thank you, and that report would not have been the success it was without the efforts of some people, and I think acknowledge them would make them go further, and the people around them add to the effort as well. Very good idea.
Okay, we have a mover and a seconder. Everyone's spoken who wants to speak, I presume. All those in favour of accepting the environmental report? Against? Okay, projects, item 12, staff projects and activities. I think we'll take questions on that because straight up, who's taking the questions? James is.
Just take them by exception, councillors. So if there's any questions, happy to.
Any questions? Fenton?
Fecal source tracking, Wairau River, have we had any update on? I'm assuming that's for the latest round of E. coli breaches, yeah, correct?
Yes, I don't know. Ian, whether we've got any results on that at all? Yeah. Wairau as well. So yes, so there were obviously high E. coli readings through the summer and followed up with fecal source tracking on that.
Sorry, the latest E. coli readings were below the guidelines.
That's right.
Yep. So
It is hovering around there. And the other second question I had, possibly a little more in depth, the answer, processing results from feedlot sampling. I'm interested, this is on page 30, Plan Change 6 implementation. But I am interested in what they're sampling, and is it something that can be rolled out across the region? Like, what are we looking for here? Are we chasing just runoff, particular contaminants, or are we looking at, are we just sampling how they're doing the job, as an example?
Look, again, I don't know whether Ian can answer that. I'm working on an assumption that it's supporting compliance staff around the work that we're doing on feedlots, because I know there has been collaboration between the science team and the compliance team as we seek to get a better understanding of the performance of feedlots in relation to water quality.
Yeah, it is the latter. It is the chief executive's just explained. What I'll do is I'll circulate by email a suite of the surface water quality parameters that are being sampled in that, and any results we've got.
Can I just ask as a follow-up, are you doing groundwater sampling as well?
Because none of these feedlots are impermeable, are they?
So we do have groundwater monitoring sites and networks across the region that we monitor monthly for groundwater quality. Some of the operations also have their own monitoring requirements and monitor bores. So that work carries on as well.
And a third one, Chair, very quickly, thank you. Regard to engineering, and yet again may not be able to be answered, but I'm interested in the Gisborne District Council stop bank upgrade. I understand we assist them with a bit of expertise there, but this has been going on for a long time. Just how much is this, how much bang for buck are we getting about being the good neighbour here, or is it becoming a bit of an ongoing and growing resource drain for us?
Well, look, it's cost recovered in a strict sense, but there's an opportunity cost with our staff. This whole exercise, as you note, Councillor, has been somewhat more drawn out than had been anticipated, as there have been technical issues related to the stop bank, and so. Our staff have been drawn into this much more than was originally budgeted. Yes, we're recovering those costs, but it is preventing those staff, particularly Mr. Clode and Mr. Goodyear, from doing other work which is of priority for us. And I guess it is a bit of an example of the risks that come with doing work for third parties. While we can, in a strict sense, recover the costs, it does come at a cost in terms of our own staff time available for our own priorities, and particularly when something goes beyond what is budgeted, it has an impact.
I have 31 tomato mushrooms. After the Chief Executive made some comments at the Environment Committee meeting about where he thought things were headed, that got reported, and it looked like Mr. Whitaker was disputing the account. Is there been any movement on that front that you can publicly comment on?
Our understanding with Mr. Whitaker is consistent with his public statements, and that is that he has not yet at this point in time made a decision to relocate his composting operation to Central Hawke's Bay. He is pursuing some consenting options, if you like, but he is also in parallel continuing to pursue the redevelopment of the Brookvale Road site. So he has both strategies available to him effectively, and he is still pursuing resource consents on both cases. In relation to the specific consent application here, we are still waiting on the Hastings District Council to receive the traffic and noise reports that they require for their consent. So this consent application still remains on hold. And we are presently engaged with our legal advice around all the issues that this gives rise to, therefore.
Okay.
Alan.
Number 32, regarding gravel extraction, just reminds me that the chairman and myself and Councillor Bevan paid a visit to some property owners out past Bridgepaw a while back, who have some severe concerns about Russell Road's operation out there, and with their contention being that, on the one hand, while we consent the removal of the gravel from the river, that then triggers another step of processing and follow-on activity that is still unconsented by the Hastings Council, but happening on our property. And so there seems to be a gray area that needs to be looked into, perhaps, as to what happens in that situation, and what advice can those folks be given as to relief they might seek.
Perhaps I could give you some follow-up information on that. So Russell Roads have, I understand, applied to the Hastings District Council for consent, and that application is on hold. In the meantime, Hastings District Council have served them with an abatement notice, and they have appealed that to the Environment Court. So that's what that's.
And the Environment Court has rejected that because Hastings didn't even bother to show up to defend it. So
I didn't know that.
things have progressed a bit along here,
Okay.
but it does seem like there's an activity going on our land that is causing some significant issues, and it's not clear whether we have any standing to address the matter anyway.
Yeah, I'll make the observation that all of the land that we administer for river control purpose is actually not technically our land. It's Crown land, and it typically sits actually with the Department of Conservation as the formal owner. We have powers of stewardship of that land essentially under legislation, so it does get a little bit murky. My understanding is our traditional approach has been to leave it to the operators largely to meet their obligations, whether it be under health and safety legislation with respect to WorkSafe, or whether it be land use activities with respect to the District Council, or any other regulator, and try not to take responsibility, if you like, for the totality of the activity for which others are responsible for regulating. Having said that, I appreciate that optically we are the managers of the land surrounding our rivers, and as a public authority, we would reasonably be expected to be involved with resolving these sorts of issues. There has been a lot of dialogue with Russell Roads, Hastings District Council, and with that local community. And as far as I'm aware, there is a proposal on the table which does seek to resolve a substantive proportion of the concerns of that community, but our primary interest of ensuring that gravel extraction still happens at that location remains. And so there is some working through to do between the parties. And most of that does at present really sit with District Council and Russell Roads to resolve. So we're being supportive and facilitative of that, but that's where the decision making resides.
So I know it's not our authority, but how long, you say the consent has been put on hold, but in the meantime, Russell Roads is proceeding to do a bunch of stuff that these folks feel is inappropriate. So how long can a consent sit on hold in general terms and allowing nothing to be done about it?
Well, they're non-complying at the moment, and hence they've been served with an abatement notice, and the abatement notice has been thrown out by the court. So the District Council will be in a situation of what does it then elevate that to a prosecution and then go to the court and risk the same sort of reaction from the court. And look, I don't know whether the court solely threw it out on the basis that HDC didn't show, or whether it had broader concerns about the merits of the abatement notice itself. So this is a difficult situation, but it is primarily an issue for the Hastings District Council to resolve.
Okay. And last one, go ahead. Sorry.
Just follow up from that, Chair. So Jones, you've made the comment. Obviously, we don't own the land. Actually sits with DOC.
No.
We don't. We do.
No, that land is held by the Crown, and we have particular rights and powers with respect to the stewardship of the land for the purposes under the legislation. But that's relatively narrowly prescribed, which is to say we cannot alienate the land in so much as we can't choose to sell it, and we can't also use it for purposes other than for which it was obtained in the first place, which is river control. Yep. So it's not land, if you like, that we own and therefore can do with as we wish.
But Russell Roads has a lease with us to operate on that particular site, don't they?
They have a concession to take the gravel, and they have a license to effectively occupy, which is us contracting to them the ability or contracting to them the sorts of functions that we have, which are the administration of the land for a particular purpose. So we are able to give them that ability because it relates to the purpose for which we hold the land, which is river control.
Okay, so let's cut out the verbiage here, and let's cut right to the chase. Given that they are carrying out on land that we're responsible for administering an unconsented activity, and we have no idea how long they'll continue to do that in an unconsented state, do we have any right to ask them to cease and desist it?
I think we could withdraw the licence to do what they're doing there. I guess our concern would be, one, they have been there for quite some time. Two, there is another agency responsible for managing the land use and land use effects. And three, we very much want to ensure that gravel extraction continues at that site and it's economically viable for an operator to take from there. So there's a balance of issues that we've got to weigh up. And certainly the last thing we want is for gravel extraction to cease from that site. It is a very, very high priority gravel extraction site for the protection of the Heretaunga Plains. And that is our overarching objective at this present point in time, which is why we've worked quite pragmatically around an alternative access and an alternative processing site with Russell Roads. What I don't understand is why all the parties haven't wrapped their arms around that proposition and it hasn't been advanced.
Sorry, James, to labour on this particular issue, but that response to me implies that Russell Roads is the only option we've got for extracting gravel from that particular site. To my mind, in a free capitalist society, the way capital works is that if we get rid of Russell Roads as an operator and there's something else will come in to fill that gap because there'll be gravel there to extract. To my mind, these are people who are sitting on our land that we're under control. To me, it's exactly like if I'm renting a house and I have someone manufacturing pee in the house, I don't want them in there. And so this to me boils down to that same thing. If these people cannot operate within the consented conditions and they cannot operate with a social licence with the community that they operate in, then I think we have a problem. So
look, I understand
Can I
that.
say the opposite direction of that? But I'm annoyed about this. Someone's trying to make this our problem. And it started by saying they're operating on our land. They are clearly not operating on our land. We do not own it. So our ability to influence things are shrunk. So the analogy about being the owning the landlord and your tenant making pee is completely wrong. We are not the owners. We have a narrow focus. The second thing is we have given them a consent for what we're entitled to do. There are other things which other people do, and it's up to them to get it with the other people. That's the Hastings district. And it's up to the complainants to do that. What we're being asked to do here is overreach and become the policeman from this point of view, and I don't accept that.
Just to clarify, I was at the meeting, Rick. They weren't asking us. They were quite distressed about the situation, and they were telling us what this. It was a meeting. It was a cup of tea meeting, and we didn't know our rights or otherwise. They didn't know that. Either they were just telling us of the situation, and they have subsequently hired a lawyer, so this will all, what will be with their new lawyer.
Chair, could I just make a comment in relation to the point made by Councillor Bailey? There are a couple of other gravel extraction sites further downstream on the main stem of the Ngāruaro that are used by competitive operators to Russell Roads. So yes, there are other operators, but there is also a finite market. And one of our ongoing challenges is ensuring that we are getting sufficient gravel extraction done that is at no cost to this council and to the ratepayer by roading contractors. And it's the view of our staff that retaining Russell Roads at this location based on the market, the availability of raw material, demand, etc., is desirable. But that's certainly something I'm prepared to continue to look at.
Okay,
move the reports received.
You got something?
I have a further question.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just do want to clarify though that Russell Roads will have a licence to operate from this council, which inevitably, having had a licence itself in the past, contain conditions such as obligations to meet all their resource consent requirements. Can you confirm that in fact they do have those obligations, and are we overlooking those in the interests of the broader issue of gravel extraction?
So look, they do have a range of conditions they need to meet. I don't have those in front of me, and so I couldn't categorically confirm the nature of those, but I would be confident there will be general provisions around meeting their legal responsibilities, and therefore I think, as noted before, there is potentially grounds for us to withdraw the permit, the gravel extraction permit, on the grounds of the issues they currently face. Whether that is a prudent thing to do based on our broader interest is a separate question.
Tom, we'll come around to you, but Tom, you got one other.
Are you still on this subject?
No.
Okay. And my next one is on item 13, which refers to tank. And the language there says, recent and upcoming meetings experience growing intensity of presentation. I think the way intensity was used there was to say that there's a lot being shoveled out. But there's also another intensity that is beginning to manifest itself. And we're, I think, at the last few meetings, at least as scheduled, for resolving all of this. And my suggestion is that it is finally getting to the point where the potential fractures in the process are becoming evident. And there was also a meeting of the Economic Working Group the other day, and there was more of the same surfacing there. So we're finally at a point where the key issues are in front of us, I think. And meanwhile, we have all of our other stuff going on with the WCO and all that. I don't know, I'm suggesting there may be a need. I mean, the staff running this, I mean, on a day-to-day basis, Marianne in particular, is very focused on moving language, really. And the way these last couple of meetings have been run, particularly the broader plenary group, people who are around the table who are supposed to be forming some commonality of view about this aren't really, the meetings aren't structured for them to engage each other. What happens is a presentation gets made, and then there's kind of a polling process, who agrees with this or who agrees with the next thing. Yep, looks like it's 11 to 9, and we move on to the next issue. And that one was 8 to 3. Well, let's move on to the next issue. And so, that's, I guess, expeditious in terms of the staff feeling, okay, well, that's the best we're going to get by way of guidance on the day. But it certainly isn't a process that is ultimately aiming at, well, maybe we need to hit the pause button here on this one and spend the next half hour hearing what everybody really thinks about this, because we're missing those opportunities now. So I don't know. It may be that I'd rather go to a workshop on, where is the tank process at this point, and what are the issues that we need to be managing politically around it, than a workshop on outstanding water bodies. I mean, I know we have to do that too, but I'm a little worried that the mechanics of this are cranking along, and the bigger picture is not kind of moving alongside of it with sufficient oversight.
So, Chair, my question was in exactly the same area, and I was at the beginning of the meeting, at the end of the meeting, because I had a Pit Fruit New Zealand board meeting during the day as well. But my sense of the meeting is that the camps are forming, and the willingness to listen to others and compromise appears to be diminishing, and it leaves me concerned for the 5-year investment we've made in this process, and whether we're going to come out the other end of it with any consensus. And we now, of course, have a time constraint hanging right over our heads, which is the WCO tribunal reforming. And look, unfortunately Tom's not here, but there are others in the room that were at that meeting last week, and I'm interested to have a sense of whether you think we're going to get over the line with this, or whether we're going to have a fractured plan change that's going to be challenged by every Tom, Dick and Harry, because I'm really concerned that's going to be the outcome.
Well, look, I think they're great observations, and it's very helpful. And look, I suggest that that we take this offline with both you councillors in particular, with the facilitator and also the project leads on this, to think about how we are going to manage the next few months. I'd make the observation that I think one of the things we're now experiencing is the consequences of having more than 30 people involved in a collaborative process. And that in a practical sense makes it difficult to call regular deep dive meetings with small groups. If you were doing this with a dozen people, you could have 3 times the meetings and you could have long periods spent deliberating. If we do that with small groups, then we're always going to have to take it back to a larger group for ultimately their concurrence. So we're caught in this, how do we ensure that everybody's part of the decision making, and how do you do that expeditiously with 30 odd people around the table? And so I think that's a design question, and I do know that certainly with the Canterbury Zone committees where they had 12, they did go and locked into rooms for days on end to really wrestle down the hard decisions, and they typically got there in the end. But trying to do that with 30 plus stakeholders is pretty damn challenging. So look, we'll take that offline and think about what we can do a bit differently, because I think the concerns raised are valid.
I think it's a huge challenge from now on. Not even extending the points which you've made. There's other issues which it was always going to be a big challenge, and there's some major hurdles to get across now that we'll just see how good we are as a region at jumping them, working together rather than ending up in court. Are there any other issues, or do we have a mover to
I'll move to accept the report.
move? Thank you, Councillor. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you very much. So the last item is items discussion is not on the agenda. I'll kick off with my 2. I'm actually going to have 3. One is Councillor Hewitt and I visited Takapau on a Saturday to a wānanga there, which was really outstanding. It was about a recreation, reclaiming a gully and replanting it, and also about the establishment of a new marae on a old marae site. So it was very well attended, and I thought it was an outstanding day. Councillor Bailey and I and Tom Skirman visited Upper Narrora to visit Whakari Trust and Ngāmatea. The meeting was held at Ngāmatea to talk to them about the water conservation order and how they wanted to move from here, and we said that the Heratonga people were standing with them, basically. They really appreciated that, and we actually visited the headwaters of Narrora, and if you want to talk about outstanding water bodies, man, that is one. And I guess that is the problem that I have and that they have, and that is they already know it's outstanding, and they're already doing a huge amount of work to ensure that it stays outstanding, and they've done so in one case for 1,000 years, and the other case for 200 years. And they don't want people from Wellington telling them how to keep it outstanding, and that's what concerns me about us talking about what is outstanding, what isn't, because as soon as we say that is outstanding, it's a hole in the wall for fish and game to dive into and to say, oh well, we're going to make it a conservation order. So it was a really good meeting with essentially mana whenua who have done a phenomenal job and want to continue doing a phenomenal job for the community with outside interference, and I thought it was great. So subsequently, it's our intention to invite the key protagonists in the water conservation order to go to Ngāmatea and to meet these people and talk about the issues. We also, Mr. Mohi and I went to Rangatani with a couple of our staff members to visit them. It was a long way to go. It was quite a short visit, but I think worthwhile in the end, because we got to understand some of the issues and certainly meet the people. And it was good for just a road trip with Mr. Mohi, hear about all his life.
So where's actually Rangatani?
That's actually the settlement group.
But it was a place.
No. He's giving me a hard time now. Where did we actually go? What was the little town? Masterton. We met them in Masterton. They are the three items. The same day we went to the Upper Narrora. Councillor Marker went to Gisborne. He's going to report on that. Next item.
Well, I went the night before to Gisborne. They had there was a big announcement on the Friday by the government on its regional development fund, and James and I went up the night before because they had a few drinks and a few introductions, and the minister turned up late because the planes were late. Thank you, Air New Zealand, and whistled around the room and then gave a speech in which he then said that recognised me there and said that he's looking forward to announcing tomorrow the reopening of the line from Napier to Wairoa, and is looking forward to me organising for him a Ratana band to welcome him into Wairoa. The Ratana band came from an idea from Councillor Fenton, so I've now, Councillor Wilson, so I've now said to Councillor Wilson, my reputation hangs in his hands. I'm not sure who this is more dangerous to, him or me. But anyway, the next day the function was set. There's never been such a big announcement at Gisborne. Gisborne was jammed with the grey taxi company going backwards and forwards. I don't think Gisborne has seen as many suits and ties on the street in the last collectively 20 years. The locals were a bit bewildered by the comings and goings, but everybody arrived, and we had a fabulous collection of mayors from the far north. John Carter was there, the Mayor of Whanganui was there, the Mayor from Matamata Piako was there, a pile of other mayors, including Ming Foon, so it was a big occasion, and the announcement was made and well received. There's no question that provincial New Zealand is going to benefit from this. It is a different thing from what we had in the past. In the past we've had policies and reds, and we've been unsure about where the funding's coming from. It's been very clear now that the funding is there, and it's $1 billion, and it's $1 billion a year, and the Minister has $2.5 billion to spend before the next election. What he has said is, made it very clear, that as far as he's concerned, the regions are going to have to meet him halfway. Now, in several areas, people said, well, it's great, the government's going to turn up and spend some money. And I was at pains to tell them that wasn't the message I got from this. The message I got is that the regions are going to have to plan, have a workable plan, make a commitment, and it's going to be meet them halfway. So we're going to have to do a lot of work. I thought it was an outstanding success, and also, more importantly, because it confirmed the announcement of the opening of the railway line between Napier and Wairoa, which is going to be an outstanding thing. And the Minister's put his own reputation on this, so it's going to happen. And I'm pleased about that. Which brings me to the next point, is that I think it's going to be really important that the region has a meeting of mayors and the chair. I see that the chair has started to initiate this, which is a good thing. It's regional development, and if we're going to have success at making good bids for this, it's going to need to be regional plans. And we're going to be able to need to demonstrate that there's development and there's benefit for us in terms of the key areas. And it would be best, in my view, if Hawke's Bay turned up as Hawke's Bay, supported these proposals as a Hawke's Bay proposition, not just a proposition from one entity or another. So if we wind up with 5 proposals from 5 different councils, I think our voice will be lost. So I think it's really important that Hawke's Bay sees itself in that light. There are some people who are involved in this. I think one, I'm trying to track down, I think one of the members of the panel is making the decision, lives in Hawke's Bay. He used to be from Wellington. I think he's shifted, so I'm trying to track him down and see if he still lives here. If that's the case, I think we should invite him along to a meeting of ours so we can have a talk directly as to what the panel is seeking to do. There are other people involved who I know quite well from the past, as Carl Crafer is one of them. And I think we should invite these people to come and speak to us, and particularly a meeting of mayors and the chair, so we hear from it directly what it is. So this represents an opportunity, and an opportunity of substantial proportions. I don't think we've been presented with an opportunity like this in decades for investment in our region, and it's an opportunity we shouldn't muck up. I am aware that we've had opportunities before and we've blown them. A previous administration had substantial sums of money for the redevelopment of regional museums. The first round, Hawke's Bay never actually put in an application, so missed out on that. The second round, we couldn't put in an application because we didn't have such things as a strategic plan, etc. And on the third occasion the round was open, we couldn't put an application in then either. So 3 opportunities to have money for regional museums, we were not able to get a cent out of it. That's our history because of the lack of coordination between the local councils. We cannot afford to have that repeated again. I can give you other examples of where we've missed the boat. We can't afford to miss this one. So we need to work hard and to get our minds focused on this and get some good plans and to go forward. The third item I had, Chair, was cadetships. I saw the other day that Gantz, who's well known here, retired was a cadet for this council, 40 years, and is leaving. I also hear today's...
What?
No, it wasn't leaving, but he's only been leaving for 40 years. He's not going to stay forever. Listen, let's face it. 40 years in one place. He might be midway through his career, but I doubt it. But the point is that we do know that it's very hard to recruit people in this area, and there's a shortage of skills around the place. Now, he came on in a cadet scheme. We no longer have a cadet scheme, and no one has a cadet scheme. And I think it would be time for this council to take the initiative to go and approach other councils and to get the equivalent of the cadet scheme reinstated. And we need to reinvest in developing skills and growing them ourselves. I think it's just a process which is fraught with danger to simply do nothing and then hope that one day when you want someone, you put an ad up on Trade Me and you're going to get a whole line of suitable applicants which are going to delight the recruiters. Well, that's not going to happen. You're going to have to put something in to get something out. And I think we have to put a lot more into training. And one of the things that I have always thought was an outstanding part of New Zealand's training culture was the cadet scheme, the NZCE process and so on. And I just think if it's not there, I think we should look to have it reinvigorated. And I know that there's a meeting of the regional councils, so I just think one of the items on the agenda for the regional council meetings could be, can we reinstate the cadetship in some form or other? Because if we don't invest in training, no one's going to do it.
I just want to firstly comment on the submission made to the Napier City Council in regard to Plan Change 11, which is their Plan Change number, and to thank and congratulate Mr. Skurman on an excellent submission. And in that regard, I think it's useful to point out in his submission that he's made the point that as joint partners to the Heritonga Plains Urban Development Strategy and managers of the stormwater and drainage assets in the Aohuri Estuary catchment, we are not currently convinced that the rezoning and associated infrastructure planning in place is sufficiently sound. It goes on to detail, if you like, the lack of consideration of the regional policy statement. It goes on to say there's a lack of consideration around flooding into the lower Taipo stream. It considers the natural hazards such as liquefaction, and overall I'd be interested to know whether staff can advise this council what, in addition to making submissions, what other steps can be taken to ensure the appropriate assessments have been made and will be made to enable their plan change to take effect. I suspect that on the basis of this submission, this council could effectively suspend the process if that was a means of ensuring compliance with our obvious requirements.
Thank you, Councillor. Just first of all, to clarify for the remaining councillors, I think you're the only one who's received a hard copy. It is available online, and it is also going to be available to you all as a link in your upcoming Regional Planning Committee agenda as well, but it is available online, the actual submission. And thank you for the feedback for Mr. Ide and Mr. Skerman. In terms of the submission itself, I think it acknowledges that some of the detail that it goes into and some of the concerns that are expressed or potential issues that are identified, it's not necessarily the place of the rezoning application, which is essentially what this plan change is, but they wanted to flag it. So from our opportunities are going to be more around where Napier City Council or any other developer will require resource consents from us for some of that infrastructure and new discharges. So that's, I think, your question about where we could get into the more the detail is at that stage. Nevertheless, as part of a submission, we will appear in front of Napier City Council when the hearing is held for the plan change, and will attempt to get from them a decision that commits them to formal discussions with us about the infrastructure requirements, including the standards that will be expected.
Where is the plan change? It's for a subdivision. Where is it?
It's for the up behind the Mission Estate.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's up
Parklands.
Parkland.
Yes.
Sorry, Park Island. Sorry,
Park Island.
the other
Park
one's
Island.
Mission Estate.
Your next point.
The next issue, Mr. Chair, is the Ahuriri Estuary recent contamination issue, and I wonder whether we can be briefed on that. I've received some information, and thank you for that, but I wonder whether we can have the latest update in terms of our response from this council.
Chair, if you just bear with me, I'll just put a picture up on the screen for you. So I've just had the team pull together a plan that'll run us through into. I can actually read that through.
You should delete some of those files then.
I should do, shouldn't I? So these are the sites that the team are sampling in and around the estuary following the high enterococci count about 2 weeks ago. There's 5 sites. What they're attempting to do is narrow down the source of the contamination. So these sites are being sampled daily with the view that any high readings from any of the sites will be sent away for fecal sterile sampling to try and determine which of those range of sources might be the cause of the contamination. It is a little bit like chasing a needle in a haystack. As you'll appreciate, it's an area with a range of potential sources of contamination like we've found, because enterococci and E. coli are bacteria that are commonly found in the guts of many warm-blooded animals, including ones that are there because we're doing our level best to get them back there, such as birds, through our restoration activities. So the work is an attempt to try and narrow down the potential sources and understand whether it's a result of an infrastructure failure, whether it's a result of the boats within the marina area, or whether it's a broader diffuse source of contaminants from things like birds. So that work has carried on for the last just not quite 2 weeks. It'll be 2 weeks this week, this Friday, on a daily basis and over the weekend. The most recent results have been clear. That work will be reviewed this Friday with the most recent results available and a decision made to carry on with daily sampling or to reassess the timing and the frequency and the locations of the sampling. We've also teeing up to meet with the Public Health Unit of the District Health Board and the Napier City Council to start to get their assistance to help us to narrow this down a little bit further and get their input to any additional work that we might want to do beyond this point. But like I say, it's quite challenging for us because the the pattern of contamination hasn't followed the traditional or typical one of being associated with rainfall events. They've been in dry weather flows. There's no obvious source, i.e. an illegal discharge or an accidental spill or something that may have contributed to it that meets and fits with the timing of the samples. So until we get a really good fecal sterol sample, i.e. to narrow down the source of the contamination, we're really hunting in the dark a little bit. Nonetheless, there's rest assured there's a very concerted activity. It spans the science team and Ms Lambert's team as well. So there's a range of people involved and engaged in this, and like I say, a systematic process and a process of review to come back and reassess and check and determine whether we've got the right work happening in the right places. So that's constantly happening.
Thank you, Ian. Do we want questions to that?
Yeah, just very brief one, Chair. Just going back to the picture you put up there, Ian, the blue dots are obviously where you're taking the samples from,
Yep.
but the words in there, like the bird, boats and human, there's no significance to those apart from
No,
those?
sorry. So I should put out those are potential sources. So
Right.
we're looking for sites that correspond to potential sources
Yep.
to again, if we pick up, and it's just really unfortunate that the way the science is, or the sampling works, is that perversely for us to get fecal sterol work, which is effectively DNA sequencing of the bacteria, you have to have a high count.
Yeah.
And of course, we don't want a high count.
Yep. I was just
so-
concerned that if anyone from the public saw that particular photo, they'd jump to the conclusion that because you've put human in there, that means you've got a suspicion that it's human contamination. And
And
as you say,
absolutely, that is the suspicion, is that
Yeah.
that's potentially one of the sources, and so we can narrow it down by sampling there. And if we get a
Yeah.
high count, and we DNA type it, and it is human, then we can start to focus in on the places where human effluent may get into the pond or the estuary.
yeah, no, thanks for that.
I think it's fantastic work, and I won't ask you whether you're narrowing it down, but hopefully you are. It's got huge interest from the public, this issue. So yeah, well done for that. So that is the end of our meeting. Thank you very much for attending. Have a safe journey home. What's that? Oh, we can do that. You're still talking to me. What? What's that?
Okay.
Close our meetings tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hoka mātou ki a koe tēnei ahi ahi. Mana ki te a mātou hoki ki o mātou wākaina. Ko te tumera ko te ngāka ka pata mai te whakaropai mo te tumomo kōrero i te ahi ahi nei. Tia ki mai a mātou hoki ki o mātou wākaina koe nei mea ka pātai ke runga te ingo i hokarati. Ake. Amene.